Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished speakers and colleagues, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are on the globe. My name is Jean d'Aragon, Senior Sustainable Development Expert at the UN Office for Sustainable Development, known as UNOSD, based in Incheon, South Korea. I'm very pleased to welcome you for this fourth session of the Executive Training course for policymakers on the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, which is organized by UNOSD. And as this year again, the Executive Training course focuses on the forthcoming high-level political forum, known also as a HLPF, that will take place in July 2021, where the discussions will revolve around sustainable and resilient recovery from the impact of COVID-19 pandemic. And through the presentations and discussions on the HLPF, the voluntary national reviews, or VNRs, and the selection of sustainable development goals, the SDGs, that will go under the in-depth review during the HLPF next July. We hope that this training course will help you to understand and actively take part in the implementation and review process of the SDGs in your own countries. I hope you could follow the three first sessions, Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, where we looked at the SDG 3 on good health and well-being, SDG 8 on decent work and economic growth, and yesterday on SDG 12 on responsible, sustainable consumption and production. If you missed one of these, you can still watch them, and as all the sessions are recorded as we go and could be found at our website. My colleagues at UNOSD will add the web page address on the chat box. Tonight, we will continue the presentations and discussion on Goal 16 on peace, justice, and strong institutions. I will give the floor to Ms. Licia Saner-Yu, Professor in Organization, Development, and Institutional Learning. Professor Saner-Yu is President of the Center for Socioeconomic Development, CSEND. She has over 20 years of experience as advisor to governments and international organizations on organizational development and reform of public administration. And Professor Saner-Yu was instrumental in organizing this training course, as she's also our guide with the course throughout the week. She will now introduce the moderator for tonight's sessions, as well as the very interesting speakers who are scholars, professionals, and practitioners who will share their knowledge and experience with us tonight. She will also introduce the rules for tonight's session. Professor Yu, Licia, the floor is all yours. Please go ahead.
Well, thank you very much, John, for very kind introduction. So let me first greet everybody and saying good morning to people in North America. Good afternoon for people from the Europe continent, and then also good evening from Asia. It is indeed an impressive process to see that we could all get together, and maybe funny, it's a strange thing to say. Thanks for the COVID. Now we are indeed in the digital era, and we start to feel more comfortable to work, interact, and learn and exchange on the internet. So let me say a few words about Dr. Jean Aragon, because he's very modest every time he introduces everybody, but never say anything about himself. So he has a very extensive background. Before joining the UN, he's already started with the International Development Research Canada to sort of get into the policy issues and analysis. And afterwards, he has gone through different posting, and of note, of course, the UN Habitat, and that is very critical because we consider that today, the linking pin of the global process is not only just the states, but also the cities and also smaller sub-administrative units. This is where the frontline the public administration, the government meets the people. And this is where the local demands could be better expressed and fulfilled. And other things that I would like to stress is that because in view of future natural and man-made catastrophe, and Jean, if I may call you that, has also done a lot of work, starting from the regional center in Nagoya, dealing with disaster response and also other similar work. So this is Jean, and I wanted you to know that he represents resources for the UNOSD. Let me say a few words about the UNOSD. Besides, it is based in Korea. The mission of UNOSD is to contribute to building, exchanging, to build, exchange, and facilitate the use of knowledge in support of sustainable development. So it specializes in mapping, assessing, and improving the exchange of knowledge, resources, and also it conducts research and capacity development in different areas related to sustainable development. So it is a very important knot in this global knowledge infrastructure that we see unfolding in front of our eyes every day. The ETC, the Executive Training Course, in this context, is intended to provide policymakers with the knowledge, skill, and tools for implementation of the 2030 agenda. But at the same time, it's also about how to prepare better so that during the high-level political forum, when the countries come to report their national progress, it could become a more meaningful and evolving process. And this has been evidenced by the fact that quite a few countries will be reporting the third time this year. So that shows benefits have been experienced through the engagement and participation and the effort of preparing this report. And let me just show my screen briefly in terms of today's session. Can I show it to? Sorry, I need to. Okay, there we go. Very briefly, are you seeing it or you're not? Okay.
Not yet, teacher.
Okay, now I'm coming. I just want. I don't think it's a. I'm not having. Okay.
Now I think it's coming.
Sorry. I just wanted to sort of set the frame for our session because it is short and time is a really valuable resources. So what we want to do is to raise awareness on key issues within each SDG areas. As you know, we're not covering all 9 SDGs in depth, but rather choosing 4. And within the 5 SDGs, we want to pick the critical issues that could help unravel the rest of that particular domain. And the second thing, it is about sharing information and experiences so that we can tackle to some of the linking issues within each SDGs and tools developed. And I think from the first day, Professor Kim presentation based on the Global SDG Report 2019 has shown that, the linkages. And yesterday, I also briefly mentioned David LeBlanc's work in this regard. And Ramon today, Professor Sander today will be stressing that point also. And it is also important for us to hear reflections from countries, from some of the participants who are, who came forward to make their voice heard and their views attended to. So we are very grateful they could be here. And the last point is about offer key learnings from the global views review process of AVNR, and which we have done that very specifically on day 1. And the last one is to support the effective use of the process. So with these few words, I would like to sort of go into a little bit about how we can interact. Due to the constraint of the platform we are using, so that the interactions amongst the participants with the speakers and lectures could only be possible through two ways, the chat and the question and answer. And so if you want to direct to the panelists or speakers, please use that. Otherwise, your message will be sort of be broadcasted to everyone. So it will help us greatly if you can raise your questions inside of the question and answer box, so it would allow us to see it more quickly and more clearly. And the last point I would like to say is that we are looking at a circular process. We hope that you will join us to give us your feedback at the end of the session so that we could hear from you in terms of your thoughts about how this is designed. We are all learning about how to do things online, and such feedback would be of great help to all of us. So thank you very much. And I wanted to introduce today's moderator, Raymond Sanner. He's a professor for Organization and International Management at Basel University. And he has been focusing on sustainability, international relations, trade and public administration, and I would say also international negotiations for many years. And also has been actively participating in the UN DESAS process in terms of some of the initial effort of drafting the reports and the different discussions. He is a co-founder of CSAND, which is ECOSOC accredited with a consultative status, and he has been engaged in academic field as a reviewer of research, a contributor, and also the advisors for such purpose. But this is the academic side. On the practice side, he has also been working for 30 years in the field, advising governments, especially about strengthening the performance of public administration. So I hand it over to you, Raymond.
Thank you very much, Li Jia. Let me now also try to upload my presentation. Do you see anything? I can't hear you, Li Jia.
Yes,
Is it visible?
Visible, you have to enlarge it.
Yeah.
Click.
Okay. Well, first of all, thank you very much, Li Jia, for your kind introduction. It's always good to hear what one has done over the last years. And also, it's a pleasure to be part of this program. We have been with Jean d'Aragon, Dr. d'Aragon, before, and to look at several of the goals, of the SDG goals in anticipation of the high-level political forum in New York in July is something that makes very much sense to us. And as we all know, we have 9 years left to do our best to accomplish as much as we can in reaching these different goals. So today, very briefly, just as a reminder, we're focusing on implementation. How could our governments, and how could we also, in collaboration with our governments, help bring about a successful implementation? Today it is SDG 16. And it's it's actually a broad goal. It includes issues pertaining to social justice, to peace, and at the same time, it also focuses on strong institutions. And I will say more about that. And of course, our speakers later on after me will go in depth in helping us understand the importance, especially of strong institutions. I will, after my overview. There will be a first presentation. I will introduce the speaker shortly. He will look at meta-governance and the different mindsets that come with the SDGs and should be present for successful implementation of the SDGs. Then a second speaker will look at the capacity development of the public sector, particularly performance improvements, and what does it take to be successful. That includes, of course, also not only mindsets, but also values. And he will make a reference to that and explain what that means in terms of SDG 16 implementation. And we also have a country report for our participant from Nigeria who will join us, and I will also present her shortly. Now, just for all those who have tuned in and are not necessarily familiar with what SDG 16 is all about, a few words about this particular goal. As I said already before, it includes several important aspects about social sustainability. So it's about peace, it's about justice, and it's also about administration, states, government, in order for the states to be able to ensure that there is good enough justice and peace and avoidance of violence, as an example. Here you see the different targets. The 16 is a goal, then each goal has specific targets, and here we have altogether, we have actually, we have 18 goals. The last ones are just the means to achieve SDG 16. I will say more shortly. Now, here are the different targets of SDG 16. I briefly go through it. I think some of you might not know the details of SDG 16. So, target 1, 16.1 is about to reduction of violence everywhere in our societies. 2 is to protect children from being abused, exploited, trafficked, and maltreated. 3 is to promote the rule of law and to ensure equal access to justice. 4, to combat organized crime and illicit financial transfers and armed flows. 5, to substantially reduce corruption and bribery. 6, to develop an effective, accountable, and transparent institutions. 7, to ensure responsive, inclusive, and representative decision-making. 8, to strengthen the participation in the global governance system. 9, to provide universal legal identity. Here, this particularly means, for instance, a birth certificate for children being born without that registration. Of course, they would not have access to other social programs or simply do not exist as an entity in official statistics. Very important, by the way. 16.10, to ensure public access to information and to protect fundamental freedoms. 16A is, I said A and B are the means to achieve the other goals. It's to strengthen national institutions, to prevent violence, and to combat terrorism and crime. And finally, 16B, to promote and enforce non-discriminatory laws and policies. So overall, say, as I mentioned before, there are a lot of the targets aim at social sustainability, how to reduce all the negative aspects of development that could be from crime to violence, and doing this through institutions which, if they're well organized, can prevent the bad developments that might occur in terms of society. But most of all, good functioning institutions can guarantee the forward-looking development of our societies and our countries. Here are just examples. And I'd like to show this to you so you know when we get to every 4 years, we have these reviews where every country is supposed to assess how far they have been able to go in terms of implementation of the SDGs. Now, that's not just a summary assessment, good, bad, forward, and so on. It's specific. And it's specific in the sense that for each target, there are indicators that are used or should be used to measure how far a country has been able to go in terms of implementing its respective targets. Let's give you an example. SDG target 16.2, which is about to end abuse, exploitation, trafficking, and all forms of violence against and the torture of children. To measure whether this is the case, whether countries have been able to reduce these negative developments, there is indicator 16.2.2, which says the numbers of victims of human trafficking per 100,000 residents per population by sex, age, and form of exploitation. How high is the number of children, for instance, being trafficked or not? Another one, 16.6, is about to develop effective, accountable, and transparent institutions at all levels. To measure this, we have indicator 16.6.2, and that's about the proportion of the population which expresses satisfaction in terms of their last experience of using public services. So we have here a picture about what happened before COVID-19. What's the impact of COVID-19 today? It's impacting, of course, also SDG 16. Particularly if you look at the bottom, in most of the countries, in terms of their prisons, there's measure is 60% of the countries have prison overcrowding, which as such is already an unfortunate condition of imprisonment. But today with COVID-19, if they're not separated, if they're all crowded in small cells, the likelihood of them being infected by COVID-19 increases, and by that, of course, the risk of further spreading of the virus is further increased as well. Now, they have the report of the UN Secretary General, the progress report. He says here at the top, the violent forms of disciplined, targeted violence against children has, in that sense, was widespread. We have, according to the report, 69 countries where nearly 8 in 10 children between the age from 1 to 14 of age were subjected to some form of psychological aggression or physical punishment at home. So that's part of SDG 16. That's the condition which needs to be improved. On the other hand, it says here at cite the second point, the number of countries which have now binding laws and policies which give individuals the right to obtain access to information from the authorities has increased. And it's now 43 countries have adopted such guarantees over the last 10 years. So that's a positive development. Overall, regarding COVID-19 and SDG 16, the results are mixed. Of course, with the pandemic come also losses of economic activities. Budgets have to be used to help treat and save people from the COVID pandemic. Hence, less money is available and more attention is spent on fighting the pandemic. So to some extent, the 6 point, it's to some extent also a negative development, because freedom of information laws and transparencies have been reduced, hopefully only during this period of the pandemic exceptions. I think a political declaration commits the member states and the UN system to enhance national implementation and to strengthen institutions for more integrated solutions to ensure policy coherence. Policy coherence, our speakers will also address this. Of course, we all know we cannot do everything in one go. The 16 goals have to be given priorities. They are interactive. They have to be, in that sense, managed in a meaningful and efficient manner. The interaction, Li Jia mentioned this yesterday and showed you this slide from our colleague David Leblanc from UNDESA in New York, who came out 2015 with a very important paper that many still make a lot of reference to. Here you see the network of the different SDGs and how they interact with each other. So by doing maybe work on one food related to improve the food conditions, and famine also improves health, of course, improves SDG 3, and it improves also education because kids can go to school and they don't faint because they're famished. Now, last slide, technical slide, is what you see here from the Global Sustainable Development Report. You have vertically and horizontally the 17 goals. In terms of their interaction, whatever you see as circles, where there is a big circle, it indicates a positive, strong interaction between the different goals. Where you see, on the other hand, nothing, it means we don't have the statistics to measure whether there is a good or less good interaction. And finally, you see with some of the circles, you have also beige colored part of the circle, which means there are, in that sense, conflictual elements between different goals that have to be addressed when we go about implementing the SDGs as such. At 16, at the bottom, you see overall there is not much of there's no negative interaction. They're all positive, and some with other goals are very strong, others are not as strong as they could be. Now, go on to the first speaker, Louis Meuleman. Dr. Meuleman, he is a policy and governance advisor. He has worked for quite a few years now with the EU, the DG in charge of environment, and he is currently member and vice chair of the United Nations Committee of Experts on Public Administration. Louis is member of the Scientific Committee of the European Environment Agency. He also teaches. He teaches at Leuven University in Belgium, at the University of Massachusetts in the US, at Wageningen, also in the Netherlands, and he is now, as he retired recently, as we all know, most of the people retiring at the end become even more active than they were before. So he is very much involved with the process of supporting countries, but also local authorities in their implementation of the SDGs. And that includes also through working with a private sector company called Berenschot, based in the Netherlands. I will introduce also briefly Jean-Marie Cauzia. Jean-Marie is in New York now. He is working for UNDESA. He is the interregional advisor of the division there at UNDESA. And before joining the UN, he was a lecturer at Makerere University in Uganda. And in Uganda, he was also the deputy director of the Ugandan Management Institute and was an international advisor in Africa in governments and public administration. He holds a PhD in law and doctorat en droit from the University of Paris, Panthéon-Sorbonne. So he brings an aspect, a focus from a legal point of view, from a public administration point of view, and based on many years of experience of helping countries improve on their institutions. He also will share with us the aspect of the spirit of a good functioning institution and the values it should hold up. We have finally also one more presentation which I have not been able to upload. She joined us just recently, and that is, I just mention it briefly, is Omotola Fawumni. She is a member of the Nigerian Economic Summit Group and Policy Commission in Nigeria. She has done a lot of work and continues to do a lot of work in the field, particularly in the field of social security, human security. She is a member on project director of the Rescue Africans in Slavery organization, which is a non-profit organization which works on trying to improve social ills such as human trafficking, modern slavery, domestic servitude, and sex trafficking in Africa. She has previously been also with a team that led as expert on migration issues, and she is working on her MA at Eastern University College of Business and Leadership. We look forward to also to her presentation and her views about SDG 16 from a Nigerian perspective. I am now closing and hand over to you, Louis.
Very much, Raymond, and good morning, good evening, good afternoon to everybody from Brussels here. Thank you for introducing me, Raymond. I have many hats. Today I have the hat of an expert on SDG 16. I have my badge here, but maybe all the hats I have combined can be combined in one thing. I'm very passionate about quality of public administration and governance to serve the SDGs. And in this presentation, which focuses on SDG 16, I will give some ideas based on my own practice and research and things I have combined. Yeah, please, next slide. SDG 16 is very much about how to deal with the context we are working in as public managers, public civil servants. And this context is currently everywhere very turbulent. We live in times with rising inequality and poverty, climate and biodiversity crisis, the COVID-19 pandemic, and this affects the SDGs, but also differently. Not every country has the same impacts of this. What COVID-19 illustrates is that well-governed countries are coping better generally with the pandemic and with other crises. I will focus on the readiness of public administration to deal with these challenges. Next, please. And SDG 16 and also 17, I would say 17 on means of implementation, I would say I could call them the engine room of the 2030 agenda, because without these goals and the work done on that, nothing will happen. No, not one single SDGs can be implemented. But some of the SDG targets are difficult to implement and the indicators could be sometimes more meaningful. Raymond already showed the example of SDG 16.6, the target 16.6, developing effective, accountable and transparent institutions at all levels with two indicators, and one is on government expenditure and the other one on the satisfaction of population. But I can easily imagine anyway that there are countries which spend 80 to 90% of their money on the military. I'm not so sure if this is meant with SDG 16. And measuring population satisfaction, I don't know, it also links to the freedom to express dissatisfaction in countries. And I also know that Eurostat in the European Union, who has around 100 selected SDG indicators, their main indicator for SDG 16 is the homicide rate in countries, which is important, I know, but it's not good if you want to see how the quality of public administration is developing to serve the SDGs. So we have to be, there are no ready-made recipes for innovation. We have to think ourselves, we have to be proactive and creative. Next slide. But then the next question is, can we be proactive and creative? Because we have seen that many public institutions are not able to cope with the huge Agenda 2030 challenges. And one big reason for that is not the only reason, but one reason is that for decades, economic forces have resulted in small and weak governments and their agencies because the invisible hand of the market would solve all the problems. Next click, please. And the point is that small and weak governments are going together with policy and governance failure. I don't want to say cause governance and policy failure, but it's very strong links. And policy failure is, for example, the misfit between a problem and a solution. For example, an inadequate policy choice because of a lack of expertise, etc., etc. And governance failures, many of them focus on what the policy and ignoring on the how you do things, how you implement the governance question. That happens a lot, and there could then be also a mismatch between the governance style that is used and the existing traditions and culture, which helps, which results often in not good implementation. So how to turn the trend around and mobilize success factors. Next slide, please. The success is, there's some rules of thumb, you could say. There's no cooking book, but there are some rules of thumb. And one is that success is based on contextual adaptation of governance. There are no one-size-fits-all approaches for the SDGs. You can learn from good practices, and that, in the second example, the second rule of thumb is best practices do not exist, but we can learn from successful practices. The whole ideology of that there are best practices which you can just copy and paste from Portugal to Finland or the other way around, or to South Africa. It's proven that it doesn't work. You always have to adapt the good examples. So we have to learn from these examples, but we cannot just copy them. And also creating success is about creating the conditions for success. Next, please. And there are many things we could discuss, but I would like to focus on 4 themes that deserve a high priority in this context. And one is about the role of public administration and governance in government. Is it really a strategic policy area or not? And the second thing is, we know there is a lot of reform of public administration, but in which direction? And does it have a goal? Does it have a mission? And the third is, what about governance? And are we really able to think beyond the usual governance approach? Aren't there better ones to combine with? And the last one is about the mindsets. Will also be discussed in the next presentation, addressing the silo mentality. Yeah, next please. And let's go to the first topic, making public administration and governance a strategic policy area. We know how important SDGs 16 and 17 are, but political priorities are usually on the other SDGs, on energy, on hunger, on very, very important SDGs. But then 16 and 17 are forgotten. And that's a kind of, like I said, a predictor of governance failure. And we can really not afford that. Next click, please. So this means, I think, that we should give departments of public administration and governance, it's often the Ministry of the Interior or Ministry of Administrative Affairs, not so high in the pecking order as the Ministry of Finance, for example. But they should be centrally placed in the SDG boardroom, in the central committee coordinating the SDGs. And that's not the case. I know from one EU country, and their SDG coordinating people in the ministry told me, well, there is no political support for a comprehensive SDG strategy. So we focus, in fact, on an action plan for policy coherence, which is a clever move. But then I asked them, and do you involve the ministry responsible for the quality of public administration? And they had not thought of that. That was a quite new idea, that you could also involve. They said, no, the Ministry of Interior is involved with refugee problems, and they don't have time for these kind of things. But that's wrong, because the Ministry of the Interior is about the mechanisms for better governance. Okay, next, please. The second topic is that I think we should move towards mission-oriented public administration reform. For decades, the reform in public sector has been concentrating on efficiency, while effectiveness was lost. Even really like that you got very efficient, smoothly run government organizations which didn't do what they were supposed to do at all in the end, no deliverables. And the response of governments to the pandemic has already showed that the power and the importance of the state in a crisis is high, and also it's failing a lot. So the correct response to the pandemic is to demand better government and not less government. And this is nicely expressed. I'm very happy about that. That also from the among the economists, a new star, a rising star is Mariana Mazzucato. She says there are really good economic reasons to push for a return of the state. She also pushes mission-oriented innovation, and I think that could be combined. So next slide, please. Because I think that innovative governance must be embedded in mission-oriented public administration and governance reform if we want to achieve the SDGs by 2030. That means we need bold and inspirational missions for each of the SDGs, with involvement, of course, of business and civil society. And this helps, if we do that, then this helps focusing on ends and not only on the means, although the means remain very important. And one example is that the EU has huge budgets, billions of euros for member states' institutional reform and innovation. And this is increasingly used for the SDGs. I know 4, 5, 6 countries who are doing this at the moment already. Next slide, please. And what is also important is that in such a mission-oriented reform, you should create the capacities for innovative governance. And one thing to do is to use the 11 principles of effective governance, which were designed by the Committee of Experts on Public Administration, of which I'm a member, together with UNDESA, and endorsed by the UN ECOSOC Council in 2018. And these 11 principles, which are elaborated in a higher number, more than 60 strategies, and are also guidance documents in preparation. These principles are so important, I think, because it's not the only list of important principles for governance. But when you look at the classical ones from OECD, for example, or maybe the World Bank, then what you're missing is the inclusiveness part. And Raymond already mentioned social sustainability as so an important thing for success for the whole Agenda 2030. 5 of the 11 principles of effective governance for sustainable development are about inclusiveness. The principles are being used already by several countries, and the African peer review mechanism is currently doing a study to review first examples in a number of African countries. That report should be ready soon, I think. Next, please. And of course, important topics that should be part of such a mission-oriented reform are the digitalization, improving access, open government data, simplifying administrative processes, decentralizing public services to the positions where they can be dealt with best, and make partnerships with private sector and civil society on an equal footing. Next one, please. And then the third one. The third priority is to widen the scope of governance frameworks. The point is here that most commonly public governance style at all levels of government is still hierarchy. It's centralist, it's legalist, it's top-down, it has a silo mentality. And it's not inclusive in principle and not geared to partnerships and co-production. But I'm not saying that it's bad. It's just, this is the way how it is. This is the strength, if you could say, also from hierarchy. But what we should do, and the key innovation in most countries is therefore to shift the balance between the institutions and the tools and the mindsets of hierarchical network and market governance. And this is not about replacing hierarchy with non-hierarchical governance. A contextualized mix of the styles works best. So what we then call meta-governance, governance of governance, is combining the features of three classical governance styles into dynamic situational combinations. And that is something that is happening, although many people do it intuitively, is combining the different styles without even knowing the word meta-governance. That's not important, but it is happening a lot for complex policy issues. The question is, my PhD was about this issue, so one of the professors said, this is impossible. Are you God that you can do this? Playing around with these important things. But the answer is yes. I'm not God, but I can play around with it. I know because I did it. So it's something from practice. Next slide, please. So this switching between hierarchy and the market and network approaches is just based on practice. It can be done at all levels and by all public managers in any situation, with some restrictions, of course, but it requires thinking beyond existing traditions of governance. For myself, I'm born in the Netherlands, meaning that culturally, I really like the network governance approach. I hate hierarchy, don't like bosses. I would even like to kill them. So I had to learn to respect hierarchy and also the market approach. And now I can play with all three. So that is thinking about thinking beyond your own style. It's not a new governance style, but a kind of a management approach to tackling governance failure, contradictions, and trade-offs. Next click, please. And it's also about using the full toolbox. I have distinguished 50 different dimensions of features or shades of governance, which each have three different operational forms for each of the three governance styles. And if you know that, then you can switch much easier. Then you can use the whole approach. This is all separate workshop. Let's go to the next slide. One simple example is of this broader vision on governance is to apply it on multi-level governance. In multi-level governance, we have usually two approaches: the top-down approach, with instructions coming from a high level to a lower level, that can take in Europe, it takes from a European decision to local implementation can take up to 7 years. And the bottom-up approach is doing things at the lowest possible level, which is great, but it also means that usually innovations at the local level can take years to be scaled up at a higher level. So for some urgent sustainability issues, I propose the third way. Next click, please. And that is what I call real-time collaborative multi-level governance. It is possible, and in some countries people are doing it. Ministries and subnational authorities sitting together for really important issues and not in the classical hierarchical setting. Next, please. And then my last point of priority for innovation is I can touch upon is overlapping with the next speaker a bit on capacity building, of course. But this is focusing on silos. We all know that we in public sector organizations, in ministries, we work in political, institutional, and mental silos. And that's the main cause of ineffective governance for the SDGs. And the point is that many people say, oh, silos, that's very, very bad. We shouldn't have them. I don't agree. Silos are also very good. They give structure, they help responsibility and transparency and accountability. They give identity, makes organizations a cozy place to work. Next click, please. So instead of what people often say, break down all the silos, you should teach the silos to dance, to make them work together, to make them more flexible and permeable without losing the necessary structure. And for this, you need really good communication and collaboration skills. And they are there, yes, have to be trained, like the mutual gains approach, the win-win approach of Harvard. And you can also support bureaucracy hackers and boundary spanners. They fancy names for people who work in an organization and know all the rules, play by the rules, but do just a little bit more because the rules are always have some room for interpretation. Next slide, please. And also here you can use this meta-governance thinking to show that where you see that different organizations in a different ruled by different governance style have a different approach. So the hierarchical governances keep silos because we love them, we exist by silos. The network styles is more teach silos to dance, and the market governance style said, come on, it's not efficient, break down the silos. Next slide, please. And this links very much to improving policy coherence for sustainable development. That was also already mentioned in the introduction. And that's a crucial enabler of dancing silos. OECD has brought together lots of good practice examples and several reports, very, very good practical stuff, of course, but not from all countries, only from a selection of countries. And then the next click, please. UNEP was the custodian of the composite SDG indicator 1741 on policy coherence for sustainable development. This is a great achievement that they succeeded in with other people together, creating this indicator with 8 different dimensions and also achieving that it is now a so-called tier 2 level indicator, which means that it is accepted by the UN community and that countries are encouraged to test it and to use this. So UNEP has asked all UN member states to do a self-assessment on this indicator, and they are preparing also a guidance report. And this is the end of my introduction. I didn't use the 30 minutes, not even the 20, I suppose. Next slide. Next, yeah. I have 2 key messages to wrap up. First is public administration and governance reform, focusing on efficiency instead of effectiveness, destroys the capacity of governments to lead on implementation of the SDGs. It's not neutral, it really destroys the capacity. So we really have to fight against that. Second, we need to move away from the efficiency paradigm towards making public administration and governance a strategic policy, starting SDG targeted mission-oriented reform, applying contextualized meta-governance, governance of governance, and addressing silo mentality. Next slide, please. A lot of these things are also reflected in the UN Committee of Experts on Public Administration's input for the HLPF this year. And this was just published a couple of days ago. We will have our annual week meeting also in a virtual format as from the 12th April. And so I hope you can have a look on that. And the last slide is, yes, please. I put together a few links to reports with good practices and practical ideas. There is much more. I'm a big fan of the work of UNESCAP. There's very, very good in their toolboxes on capacity building, for example, but also UNDESA has done a lot of work. UNITAR, UNSTAT and UNEP, and there are some private people like me who also try to contribute a little bit to that. Last slide, thank you. And that's what I wanted to say. Thank you for your attention.
Louis, thank you very much for giving us such an important overview of what SDG 16 is all about, particularly when it comes to the public administration and government, and to help us all listening to you to see the larger context. That meta governance is not just a fancy new word, but it's needed for us to come to solutions that are neither, let's say, French or English or American solutions, how to organize our governments. We should take into context what our respective governments, how it's structured today, and then look for ways to move towards building better futures. And for that, you have given many very good ideas how to become innovative. I mean, a lot of this is the need to change, to adapt, to make our governance systems ready to support the transformation. And transformation basically means change, and change is not easy. It could also backfire and lead to resistance. And also, thank you very much for all the additional sources that you've added, which will be useful for people who are not yet as much informed about the role of our institutions. And I would highly recommend to the audience to take note of the last one you put on the list of reference. That's your own book on better governance. So let's see what has come in terms of maybe chats or questions. Maybe Lija, you followed this?
Yes. So far, we're still trying to solve the bug in terms of a question and answer. So it is not possible. So maybe I can sort of announce it to the participants. Please raise your question in the chat, because if you tried with question and answer, probably you have already experienced some difficulty. So thank you very much. Let me launch off this question and answer segment by raise one question. It was Louis, you mentioned, if we just strive for efficiency, we not only sort of at the expense of effectiveness, but also destroy, the sort of the basic stock of public administration. And you said that, sort of at a very summary form. Could you sort of elaborate that a bit more and maybe give one example? And I think the COVID time probably has a lot of example on that. So please, if you can just say a few more words.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, there's a lot to say. So one of the, I've experienced this whole movement of efficiency-driven reforms of government from the inside in the Environment Ministry and the Spatial Planning Ministry in the Netherlands for almost 20 years.
The new public management reform.
Exactly. And so already when I was a very young public manager, I got a book. We all had to read a book, and it was called "The Business Like Public Servants." And in that book, from that book you could calculate the costs of each policy paper and of each, even the minutes of a meeting could be calculated. And it was completely ridiculous. And there was no policies were not important anymore. It should be products. And this then also gradually led to the reduction of the number of experts. Of course, the rotation principle was introduced, meaning that, which is good, breaks some silos for managers, but at the same time, the public managers who were leading parts of ministry, they were not experts anymore, and they didn't really know what was important, how to put priorities. And then specific expertise centers in the ministries were outsourced. It was cheaper. When I was the project director in the ministry on a very sensitive political project on land use and land selling and buying of land for new housing, I found out that the ministry doesn't have expertise anymore. So I had to hire these people back. And so this and I'm now and then training Dutch ministry heads of units, and they all complain that what they do, they spend more and more time to clean up the mess that exists because ministers are not even able to inform the parliament anymore in an expert-wise way, and so they make more mistakes, and that takes a lot of time to restore this all the time. So it is a very wicked situation that has happened. It's not only bad because, of course, efficiency is also good, but still, many examples also of organizations that were so efficient that they could only be efficient by not doing their main task anymore. And in my workshops, I always show the example of Yes Minister, a BBC series on public administration from the 1980s already, which is really about all this. And my favorite clip is where the minister visits a new hospital with 500 people, 500 staff, and it's the most hygienic and the most efficient hospital in the country because it doesn't allow patients. Because allowing patients would create would make everything very messy. So I could go on for hours on this, but this is a short answer.
Well, thank you for your very straightforward answer. Let me see whether there's another question. Well, I think I have.
I think I have one, Nija,
Okay.
by Antoinette Richards. I read it off, Louis. The question is as follows: how do you deal with a situation where the government has prioritized spending for work around Goal 16, but it is about building the capacity of the police force instead of spending on social interventions to assist at-risk individuals? So, what to do, what should be done, what is the essence of 16 is to control, punish all the negative developments in society, or to try to prevent the appearance of negative developments in our society.
Yeah, I think that the short answer to that is that you should not see 16 as a solitary goal. If you link it to SDG 17, there you already have the inclusiveness part and the partnerships part. You cannot just take one goal or one target out and then maximize that. So I think that my question in that situation would be indeed, what about the other means of implementation? If you have an implementation problem, you can have more police on the street. That might be very good. But did the government also explore the other possibilities, other possible solutions or partial solutions, like mobilizing other actors than the state to make environments more secure, for example?
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, one is to focus on the symptoms of a not well-functioning society and then control for the symptoms, or to improve on the conditions so less of these unfortunate symptoms appear. These are, I guess, sometimes decisions which then would mean other ministries should be either given financial resources or the mandate to do more about job creation, attending to the minorities, being of service to people who are stranded, versus just to have only the Ministry of Interior control for social security.
Mm-hmm. Could I add maybe one thing? Because in my experience, in a situation like that, it doesn't help just to explain that what the government is doing in terms of priorities is wrong. My approach was always to go to these people who thought, in this case, more police force is the best approach, and saying, look, this is a very nice hierarchical governance solution, and I know you're very good in that, and this is your expertise. But you could even become better by looking also at other approaches. Like I once had to give a lecture to Ministry of Justice directors, explaining them, my task was to explain them why the network approach, the partnership approach, should replace their legal approach. And I said, this is nonsense. You are the super people, you are the legal expert. Your expertise is hierarchy. You don't leave that behind. Don't throw that away.
Yeah.
You can become better by adding other things and shifting the balance a bit and see how far you can go. And then you're talking with these people.
Yeah, I agree with you. Elita, have you seen other questions coming in? I have just a ending comment for you, Louis. Listening to your presentation made me also remember about, it was 10 years ago in the UK, they went through new public management and then outsourced the business of taking care of infrastructure, transportation, railways, and rail companies. So a lot of them were privatized, and private sector companies were given the task to manage this in terms of just the information needed and all the IT systems to do the planning of railway systems and connections. That contradicted the system within the UK government of rotation. So every 4 years, people as a principal administrator moved to another job. So after a while, they realized the new man or woman coming into the job to be responsible for the policy of transportation did not know anymore what's going on. So they couldn't answer to Parliament specific questions, especially after accidents happened in terms of the railway system. So that also brings up the question, how much knowledge should be retained and kept up in the government rather than to outsource everything of technical knowledge and knowledge as such in terms of policy making? What do you think?
No, I fully agree to that. It's some years ago, the director of one of the Dutch planning agencies or assessment agencies told me, you know something, the problem is that the reports we make, which are science-based, I cannot find anybody in the ministries anymore who has the expertise to understand what our reports are about.
Yeah.
And that's terrible. So you need to have some expertise in the ministries or in the government.
Yeah. In closing, I just saw one more question that came up. I think it's difficult to answer, but it's also true. The comment being from Nelia Rakimova. I think she says, we need to be realistic. Take the example of Russia. They do not follow such positive logic, and there is no way that civil society can talk just like that to the government about, on wrong actions.
I fully agree, and it's an important point, not to become pessimist, but also to be realistic. And because I know there are quite some people in political science who are a bit naive, I think, and by pushing for this network and the partnership approach for everything and everywhere and always, it doesn't work like that. And so if the situation is different and it is impossible even for civil society to organize themselves or to get a role, then probably some small steps have to be made and see how we have to be creative then. But it's not so simple that you just then speak louder and explain louder why partnerships are so good. It's not part of the mindset of the government.
Yeah, sometimes incremental change can lead to much more in the future than to demand immediate disruptive change. Well, we're coming to the end of your presentations, and please stay on for the panel discussions afterwards. I think it's a good bridge, the moment to hand over to Jean-Marie Cauzia, who will be talking, among other things, about the values. If governments and institutions have, let's say, minimum positive values that are part of their raison d'être, maybe the transformation process might be easier. But I don't want to put words into your mouth that you haven't said, but I look forward to your presentation. Jean-Marie, take the floor, please.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Louis, for that presentation. It certainly shares a lot with what I'm going to say. Let me say first whether I can get what to share with you.
At the bottom, it says, you can load up to share at the bottom of your screen. Sort of next to stop video, there's another one space where it says share.
Normally, I should do it easily.
Have you uploaded your presentation?
Yes.
You need to have it ready.
Yes, it's even open.
Uh-huh.
Hi, Mr. Jean-Marie.
Yes.
If you're having trouble, I can do the presentation for you from our side.
Great.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, that might be quicker. So, as it is coming, let me first thank the team for inviting me to be part of this session. It certainly gives me pleasure, and I feel privileged to have this opportunity to make this presentation. I should specify that contrary to what my degree says, I'm not a lawyer. That's the fault of the French system. I don't know why they gave me a degree which says doctorat and I'm not a lawyer. I studied public administration, but the title of the degree says doctorat and please, if you see me careful, don't think it's because I'm a lawyer. I have no legal training at all. I studied public administration. And that explains my passion for governance and public administration, especially as they relate to development. I'm going to talk about capacity development for public sector performance, which means some of the things that I should say might overlap with what Rui has presented, and I will try to make sure that we don't repeat each other. It might be a very good discussion to have two people sharing views on the same thing. I will also give some of the success stories because as Remo was introducing me, I have been running up and down in developing countries, mostly in Africa, advising governments on how to strengthen the capacities of their governance systems. And in as far as the implementation of the 2030 agenda, contrary to the pessimism that keeps on sieving through, there are very encouraging success stories and examples, especially from the countries we consider to be weak in governance. And maybe those could be more instructive than what we see in very well developed countries. Can I have the next in? Yes, just in case I collapse before the end of the presentation, I want to start by pointing out those key messages in my presentation. And I think the first one is that many governments around the world are implementing reform programs for improving public sector performance. Now, this contradicts what the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development calls for. It never called for reforming institutions, it called for transformation. Remember, the entire agenda is a transformative strategy for a better world. And so we are still stuck with reforming governance, which normally aims at making governance efficient, as Louis has been saying, and the criticism of Louis is well placed. So I would suggest that we aim at transforming governance to conform with the requirements of the capacity needs for achieving the SDGs. That's the first message. Second one, I'm saying that of all the capacity development required for transforming public sector performance, I believe that the most critical is inculcating the values and principles of the 2030 Agenda in public sector governance and in society. And I believe that the most needed value is equity. The effectiveness of any other capacity, whether you are talking of policies or strategies, the legal provisions, the knowledge, skills, systems, structures, resources, facilities, all these capacities that we try to build, if they are not within the context of the value of equity, they may lead to not much. If you look at what is happening in the world, the issue of equity is causing trouble and violence. It is causing instability. And yet this is in a situation where countries or governments are trying their best to achieve the sustainable development goals. But when equity is not seen to be implemented, discontent is very prominent, and that disturbs the entire governance practice. Next, please. Now, I don't want to repeat what we has said. He clearly put it probably more eloquently than I would. But this diagram, for failure of verbal eloquence, this diagram shows what the world has been through. But most importantly, what developing countries that adopted the Weberian model of bureaucratic public administration have gone through. Of course, most of them were taught to do traditional public administration, and when its negative side started manifesting itself, they were taught to do public management, but that one also started manifesting extremely negative aspects, and now they are being taught to do good governance, which is what the 2030 Agenda stands for. And so, especially when you are referring to countries like in Africa, you find that most governors, administrators, or managers, whatever you want to call them, are really in a situation of contradictions. They had not mastered public administration traditionally, and then it was changed. They had not yet mastered public management, new public management, and then it was changed. And certainly they have not yet mastered good governance. And so the whole learning process is becoming difficult for managers in such situations. However, I should say, and I always tell governments that they don't have to choose one of these, because it's not a question of choosing one of these. It's a question of finding an equilibrium point that enables them to have governance capacity to achieve the objectives, the development objectives that they set. Let me take this moment to say that the discussion on efficiency was very interesting. Efficiency is an internal matter of an organization. Every organization, in terms of the way it uses its resources, has to be efficient. However, it does not have to be efficient at the expense of being effective in achieving the objectives it set to serve the external call them clients, consumers, citizens. If efficiency conflicts with that, then it becomes a problem. But we cannot discard it. Now, Louis, you are a member of the Committee of Experts. This was discussed in 1996, and the committee refused the word efficiency. And if you read all the documents of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, the preamble and the rest, the word efficiency was avoided. They could have easily said in Goal 16 that there is needed to create strong, efficient, transparent, and accountable institutions. They didn't. It was intentional. They said effective institutions, not efficient institutions. Next, please. So what I'm saying is that I don't think that the world should be stuck in the paradigm of public sector reform, especially in light of the fact that the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development is a transformative agenda. So we should look for how to transform rather than how to reform. And I think this should be borne in mind by policymakers who seek to change their governance capacities or to strengthen their governance capacity. They should be thinking of transforming them rather than reforming them. Next. And this is what brings me to talk to values-based public sector governance capacity development. And I'm thinking that the deepest transformation for public sector performance ought to be the inculcation of values and principles, which are embedded in the 2030 Agenda in public sector governance. Developing capacities for public sector transformation and performance ought to prioritize inculcating these values in public sector governance. Next. And when I say values, I know that we can search in societies and get different societies have prioritized different values. But talking as a UN official, I can say that the 2030 Agenda document, that resolution of 25th September 2015, I think made our job easy because the values and principles are in there. I know that when we are talking about implementing the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, we focus on the SDGs and the targets and the indicators. That's very good. But having read the entire document, I think in implementing the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development has got two sides which must be successfully accomplished, both of them. The first one has to do with these values and principles. And the second one has to do with the SDGs themselves, the 17 SDGs. A failure in these values will definitely jeopardize the achievement of the SDGs themselves. And so, reforming the public sector in the hope that you achieve the sustainable development goals without paying attention to these values cannot achieve what the 2030 Agenda is aiming at, which is literally creating a good society. A good society is not only a society that has achieved the SDGs, it is a society that has embraced these values and lives by them, because it's a violation of most of these values that causes trouble in the world. Look at respect for diversity. See what problems this causes almost in every country, even countries which you would think are unified. A country like Somalia, which is supposed to be one people, just because they decided to create certain divisions, and they are finding it difficult to manage the diversity in these divisions, and consequently all efforts of making Somalia a peaceful and safe and secure country is failing because they haven't managed this respect for diversity. Right now, I am engaged in advising the government of Somalia, and I've discovered it's one of the biggest problems they have. It is easy for us to say in Somalia, they lack this, they lack water, they lack education, they lack health. It's true, but they can never get a situation where they achieve those unless they sort out this issue of diversity. So I will not touch on each of these, but the point I want to make is that implementing the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development can not only look at the SDGs. If we miss the values and principles that the member states clearly agreed on, then we will have jeopardized the entire program. I've already talked about equity, so I will not go into it. Next, please. Yes, I think you can. No, let me first say, let me not leave the word equity just as if it is an innocent word. It's a very loaded word. And I look at it in 4 aspects. The first one is social equity. The second one is economic equity, which we normally talk about. The third one is intergenerational equity. You know, the generations of today can easily cheat the generations of tomorrow. We can use resources today thinking that we are sorting out our problems of poverty, and in the process create poverty for generations to come. Think of the way we exploit environmental resources like forests and all this. We can do that, sort out our problems, but deplete the environment and create problems for the future. Think of the way we invest in education. We either educate a society that will serve the future or that will serve us, and then the future is jeopardized. It's the same thing with infrastructure. The infrastructure we build today may serve us for a short time, but mainly it will serve future generations. And so we have to be careful the way we develop infrastructure. Think of the way countries borrow money. You borrow today, you may borrow and sort out the problems of today, but if you are not careful, the debt you incur today might cause poverty for the future generation. So that's what intergenerational equity is all about. And then there is ecological equity. So the word equity shouldn't be taken lightly the way we know it in social and economic terms. It's a deep, according to me, it's a deep concept, and this is why I said it's the most important value in the 2030 agenda. And when it is violated, it causes a lot of problems, mainly violence, because people tend to claim their share if you can't give it to them. That's the point. Next, please. So I'm saying that this transformation is not going to happen because it is in the 2030 agenda. It has to be pushed in each and every country, at each and every level, especially at community level, through transformational leadership. And while there are many, there's a lot of literature on transformational leadership. My concept of transformational leadership is precisely pegged to the 2030 agenda, both in terms of its principles and in terms of the sustainable development goals. And if you look at those 10 transformational leadership focus areas, you will see that you can pick each of them and find its trace in the 2030 agenda, like leveraging community potential for transformation. That's people focused. The entire 2030 agenda is supposed to be people focused, not anything else. Engaging all actors and securing their support and commitment, energies, resources, and action that has to do with Goal 17, which is on partnerships and collaboration. Aligning development plans with national, regional, and global development goals. That calls on each country to integrate the sustainable development goals inside the country's development goals. Referring to Africa, I think Africa was lucky. If it misses on SDGs, it will not be for lack of plans. Because remember, by the time the 2030 agenda was adopted in September 2015, African countries had already agreed on the 2063 development strategy with 7 aspirations. And when you read those 7 aspirations, you find that they meet very well with what was stipulated in the 2030 agenda 6 months later in September. But the point I'm making is that a transformational leadership focused on implementing the 2030 agenda must align development plans at local level or national level or regional level, wherever it is operating from, with national, regional, and global development goals. Then they need to develop competences at community and political, managerial, administrative, and technical level. This is what we are talking about, capacity development. There is something we forget. Implementation requires money. So you have to ensure mobilization and frugal utilization of both internal and external financial sources. It's needed to rely on local capabilities to ensure creativity and innovation. Because when you entirely rely on external, if the external goes wrong, you go wrong. So self-reliance is an important thing in the whole process of implementing the 2030 agenda. You've got to have an evaluation mechanism that enables you to state the achievements and shortfalls honestly, because I know government reports, even the ones that come to the UN with the voluntary review reports, some of them are actually, what do they say, manipulated, not really to the point. So you have to have a monitoring and evaluation system that enables you to state achievements and force for shortfalls honestly, and then using these two to make improve performance. You have to harness an ideology and a mentality that puts people at the center of all policies, plans, and actions. You have to instill values and principles of good governance, including professionalism, accountability, integrity, and all these others. But most importantly, you have to pursue a collective vision for the future generations built on the achievements of today. To me, when I am talking to governments about leadership, this is the model that I use, especially since the 2030 agenda was developed. Since I made it, I'm struggling to develop it into a fully fledged book. Hopefully by the end of this year, it will have come out. And so if I was to develop the capacity of leadership in public sector institutions, I always focus on this. Next, please. Well, this is just to say that when you are a transformational leader, you have to aim at transforming society, at transforming institutions, and at transforming organizations, but most importantly also at transforming individuals, especially in terms of their mindsets and attitude. Next. Now, since we are talking about capacity development in public sector, we all know when you read the capacity development programs, capacity development projects, they all focus on training. And I say that's the biggest problem I have found with governments. Every donor that comes to help them with capacity building, they start doing seminars, workshops, and all this training. And I say, yes, those are useful, but capacity development is a bigger thing for a country than just to train. And so in order to correct this mistake, I have this model of comprehensive capacity development that pays attention to things that which not done, training does not help. If you don't have good policies in place, if you don't have a strategy and systems and structures in place, if you don't have laws, rules, and regulations in place, if you don't have institutional values, as I have mentioned them in place, if you don't have financial resources in the era where we are, if you don't have technology, especially the ICT, if you don't have facilities and logistics, all the resources you spend on training human resources are wasted. So it is better to have a comprehensive capacity development strategy. And then within that, you can include training. Next, please. Okay, so I will now, let's say what I have just said is sort of a framework. I will now see whether I can share with you some of the examples I have come across, which show that it is better to have a comprehensive capacity development in order to achieve the sustainable development goals. Let me say that I have benefited from two parts of my job. One is what I've been talking about as an advisor to governments. You go and work with governments for some time, and we put in place plans and some things. But most importantly, I manage the United Nations Public Service Awards Program, through which UNDESA promotes innovations in public sector institutions. And I have had the opportunity to read and evaluate all the nominations for this award. And I have concluded that contrary to what we believe, that public sector institutions are not creative, are not innovative, they are wasteful, they are red tape, all the bad things we have heard about bureaucracy. No, the public sector institutions and public servants are in a constant struggle in search for better ways of providing better services. We only highlight the bad sides of it. And so through this, I can easily have some examples I can throw to you or that can be informative. I'm going to start with Rwanda and the improvement of delivery of health science. Maybe let me first say that to consider goal 16 alone, I think is not very informative. Goal 16, effective, strong, accountable institutions, that target is very necessary for every goal, whether it is health, education, gender, environment, habitat. If there are no strong, effective, accountable institutions, that goal cannot be achieved. So when I'm giving examples, don't say, but we were talking about goal 16, how come now you are going to talk about health services? It's very important to say, how does a country as poor as Rwanda provide health services to its population, about 90% of its population? Even developed countries don't achieve that, some of them. So how does it do it? What institutional arrangements does it have in place that enables it to achieve that kind of goal? Now, we can refer back to the comprehensive capacity development framework I showed above. First of all, there is a clear vision and a clear determination of Rwanda's leadership that the population of Rwanda should not continue dying from curable and immunizable diseases. And they have a vision that they follow to ensure that. That is the first capacity they have. When you go there, they will give it to you. And if you want to help them to do something they don't want, they will tell you no. Whoever wants to help, this is our plan. You can now help. You cannot come in and help using a different plan. They have policies and they have a regulatory framework in the health service infrastructure. They have a program for developing local capacities. They engage with stakeholders. And it is through for example, through the engagement of stakeholders that they have utilized, the first country to utilize drone technology to deliver health services. Drone technology did not originate from Rwanda, it was invented elsewhere. But they managed to be in partnership with, I think, a drone technology institution in California. And they agreed that instead of having a blood bank, for example, in each hospital in the country, they have only one blood bank in Kigali. And then using ICT, this blood bank communicates with hospitals, and whenever hospital needs the blood, they just send an email, and immediately blood is taken by a drone to the hospital. You can imagine how much money they saved. First of all, they didn't have the money to build a blood bank in every hospital. Now, that's because they wanted to transform the healthcare system. That was the main objective. And then the next one was to improve citizens' lives. When you don't have this kind of commitment, you don't have any impetus to develop the public sector capacity. That's one example. Next. The second one is from Kenya. And again, it concerns a complicated SDG. The Kenya National Drought Management Authority has a focus on hunger safety net. And this has implemented a scalable cash transfer mechanism to quickly respond to drought and other similar disasters in the 4 counties. You know, Kenya, in the border with Somalia, it has got a very arid areas where populations keep migrating following changes in weather and climate and lack of water and lack of grass for animals and all this. And the Kenyan government wanted to put a stop on that. And they always have a lot of famine every time climate changes. So they put in place, using this institution, a mechanism through which they can use satellite to see how green or yellow or dry the vegetation is changing. And following that, give cash transfers to banks and local governments to give to the populations so that they can use funds to survive instead of moving to look for greener pastures, so to speak. Now, what capacity would you build through training alone if you didn't have this kind of mechanism? So if you look at the capacities that they have put in place to do this, to achieve, to pursue this goal of eliminating hunger, they have an institutional framework, they have a structure, they have provided finance, they have harnessed modern technology. Frankly, that surprised me when I received that nomination. They have mastered data and information on climate shifts, and then they have created partnerships with banks and collaborated with local level leaders. But this is because they were searching for effective solutions to people's problems, which is hunger, and also addressing climate change disasters, including famine. So sometimes when we talk of public sector capacity building for performance, we oversimplify it and say, let's go in and train. You can imagine how much creativity and how much thinking and how much mobilization went into this solution. it came near to winning the United Nations Public Service Awards. It didn't, but I retained it as one of the very creative example. I could also give you an example from Morocco, which concerns gender budgeting. You know, the Morocco being an Islamic country, it got to a point where it took the issue of gender very seriously. And of course, society was sort of resistant. So whatever government put in place as a measure to improve gender, it wasn't working. And then they decided to institutionalize all issues, to institutionalize or it's to institutionalize gender issues and put them in Ministry of Finance, especially the budget office. And the rules and regulations they put in place, they said whatever budget comes from any ministry, if it does not include gender as envisaged by government, that budget is not going to be approved. So the ministries now started panicking and planning for gender as they made their plans. So it's very important that when we are talking about public sector capacity development for performance in the context of implementing the 2030 agenda, we really go beyond training. I'm a trainer. I have made my life through training, but it's unfortunate now I'm campaigning it. I'm not saying we should avoid it. I'm just saying we should put it in the context of other things being provided. I will stop here. Maybe during the discussion, I can bring in other examples, but that's what I had prepared. I thank you very much.
Jean-Marie, thank you very much for your thoughtful reflections on what is the SDG 16, what is the public sector, what is public administration. These are very good, big questions. And we probably would agree to disagree to some extent as to what's in it when we look at the details of the SDGs. Your point is well taken that the text of the 2030 agenda doesn't mention at all or not much efficiency. It's effectiveness. I fully agree with you. The other word that was not used is accountability. You won't find in the 2030 agenda the word accountability. To me, that's an unfortunate miss, because what you gave as an example, let's say the blood bank in Uganda and the use of IT to make sure the bloods, where there is blood, could be sent to another part of Uganda in case of need, or the drones in Kenya. These technologies are, to me, efficiency tools to make the health or the agriculture sector fast, efficient, goal-oriented. And if they're not there, then it's much more difficult to be effective and to be equitable. Equitable, that's, I fully agree with you, that's sort of the core or the soul of the 2030 agenda, to provide equitable services to the citizens. And they need the means to it. And they mean the needs are not only training, through training and skills, absolutely agree with you. There are other structural capacities that should be put in place. And all of that, to me, that makes the right formula to bring about change. So I don't see it yet as a disagreement as to what the SDGs 16 is all about, but a great explanation in a broader context what this actually means. It's not just to do some bean counting, but it's the context which is very meaningful. And thank you very much for your presentation. I'm wondering if there is a response. Maybe Louis is back. We lost him briefly before. Is there a response you might have to Jean-Marie in regards to the two of yours presentation?
Very difficult. No, I think I should be very short here because I missed an important part of Jean-Marie's presentation because the internet fell out in our house because of an electrician who was doing his job. No, I.
Sounds like an efficiency problem.
Yes. Well, he thought he was doing something effective, I think so, but it was effective for him. But then my router had to restart again, and at the same moment, then also Microsoft thought, let's do a major update on Windows, and then it did. So it took a long time, and I missed many things. I think there were many overlaps and many synergies between Jean-Marie's and my presentation.
As a moderator, having followed both of your presentations, maybe a short exchange as to the two key words, equity, as well as effectiveness, and in addition, the third one being equitable. How to put together the right formula or the right magical touch when we do the transformations, where both efficiency is there, so money is not wasted, people are not wasted, but it's not just efficiency, but it's also equitable, it's also effective in terms of policies being implemented. How do you see, for both of you, what's the right mix of these three E's? Starting with E. Efficient, effective, equitable.
I think, if I may, it's a matter of context again, of situation, where how the mix should look like. And again, like I said in my presentation, it's maybe very important to work very hard on the conditions for a more effective and accountable and inclusive public administration, so that public administrators, civil servants, can decide themselves in a situation what is the right mix. So and for this it is important to have the right training. What I and also in UN SEPA we have advised last year was that in fact a basic training on the SDGs should be obligatory, should be mandatory for all civil servants in all countries and all industries. Because if you don't know the basics and if you don't understand the interlinkages between the SDGs and so on, then, and if you still think, for example, that SDG 16 and 17 are not real important SDGs, then you will not make much progress. So this is a training, capacity building is extremely important.
I guess the training in the way you described it will be not just output oriented, not just sitting in a classroom, but to make the training be linked to clear learning objectives plus application to the job. Yeah. So it's not education, but application oriented training.
Yes, I think so too. Recently I did a pilot training on this topic of teaching silent students within the European Commission with colleagues from the European Commission, and we first thought, oh, let's collect a number of nice videos with good practice examples, and then we decided, no, let's not do that. Let the people, the participants, who do follow the training, they should come up with their examples, their good and bad examples, because then it's close to their heart. And that works much better. So that's also the way how you do a training.
Yeah, Jean-Marie.
Yes, if I can come in here, when I was studying public administration and management at the University of Liverpool, at the International Institute of Public Administration in Paris, and at the Sorbonne, I was taught the 3 E's of management. And this was effectiveness, efficiency, and economy.
Economy.
Yeah, but
Not
economy.
equity.
Being economical.
Yeah.
Then when I started practicing management, I realized that these were not sufficient for performance. Because I started asking myself the question, who should judge whether an enterprise is performing well or not? The manager of the enterprise or the clients of the enterprise? I was private sector minded because I was trained that way. And then I discovered, I think there is a lot of room for the clients of the enterprise to be the ones to judge the performance of this enterprise. And then I discovered, then in that case, efficiency and economy are not going to help because, first of all, the clients are not going to have access to information and the data to enable them to judge the goodness or badness in efficiency and in economy of an enterprise. But effectiveness, the client can judge whether they are being served well. They can judge that, right? And so we need to look at the performance of governance of government at whatever level in terms of the inside, in the way it uses resources, and in terms of the outside, in the way it meets the needs of its clients, whether you citizens or whatever. When you do that, then you find that there is an E missing. This is where we are discussing equity now. So these days, I talk about the 4 E's of governance, as opposed to the 3 E's of management. And in these 4 E's, I divide them into 2. There are 2 which are directed to the people you serve, and that's effectiveness and equity. And there are 2 which are directed to the way you serve them inside, the way you use the resources to serve them, and that's efficiency and equity. The most important, as far as the client is concerned, as far as the people are concerned, it's effectiveness and equity. I always give even a crude example. If you go to hospital and you get cured, do you really mind how many syringes they have used? But the manager of the hospital is worried about how many syringes they have used. He can afford to ask, really? You have used 100 syringes on one patient? But the patient is cured. He doesn't care if he used 1 syringe or 100 syringes. So efficiency is an internal matter. Effectiveness is an external matter. But all of them are important for the success of the government. That's what I think about this.
Well, thank you very much. And I was just wondering what you have shared with us. Have you written this in a paper? Because it could be useful for others to read up on the distinctions that you are making between these different E's.
Yes, in fact, even in 2 weeks' time, I will be presenting another paper at the ASPA conference, which is online. Well, yeah, there are many writings I have done which contain this discussion on this.
Well, it would be great if you could also share with the audience the paper once it's coming out. Okay?
Yes.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much for your presentation. We're now reaching the time for the 3rd presentation. I'm not sure, technically speaking, whether Omotola, are you hearing me? Are you linked?
Yes, I can hear you clearly.
Oh, great. Okay. Hello, welcome.
Thank you.
I have presented you during your absence, but just for those who tune in just now, to mention that you are the member of a Nigeria Economic Summit, the Policy Commission, but you also have done and continue to do a lot of work in the social sphere, for instance, with your project director of the Rescue Africans in Slavery organization. So now the question is, do you have slides that you can upload, or?
I could just speak from them.
Okay. Yeah, but to also now, in terms of time, could you limit your speaking to, we're now to 10 minutes, and then we could continue in the plenary so you can further discuss and clarify afterwards. So go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much for having me. I want to thank the previous speakers for expatiating and, for me, enlightening me about everything that needs to be fixed within the public sector. For Nigeria, I work primarily within the area of human trafficking and getting women and girls safely back. And one of the challenges that was highlighted even from what was shared today was about how we don't communicate, how there seems to be a gap, a competency gap in those within the public sector and how this information flow happens. I would say that, by way of introduction, my name is Omotala Pauli. The organization I work and serve with is Rebirth Hub Africa. Rebirth Hub works to rescue, rehabilitate, and reintegrate victims of trafficking. To achieve that, which we do across, specifically across Europe and the Middle East, we have to work with governments, we have to work with the private sector, we have to work with non-profit organizations, faith-based organizations, cross-country. And all of that requires various levels of administration. That means also would be that first of all, understanding what the real issues are helps us know what help do we need to request for, who do we need to engage, how do we even request for the help of government, which of the agencies within governments need to continue to talk to each other if we're going to end this menace. So I'll give you an example. Specifically, let me use Lebanon, which was one of the countries that we worked extensively in. We have to get girls from the slave, I use slave because from the employers, because they have signed what I would call slave contracts that make them unable to leave an employment, even if the conditions are horrific. That being said, when we then try to engage public official who is at the embassy, this person says, well, I don't know who this lady is, I don't know her immigration status, and I cannot provide the help that he or she needs. What this means is that even though a citizen is in a particular country and supposed to be able to access help from her embassy, the lack of understanding from the official prevents the, I'll call them victim, from accessing services that they should normally access from their governments. This leaves us primarily with girls or women sleeping on the streets, running for their lives, and having to live in really dangerous conditions. Let me put it that way. What can we do? What are specific things that can be done? We need to find out, why did they leave their countries in the first place? And that speaks to the
You lost your voice.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. So we need to look back, because if we treat the issue of just getting them back home without fixing why they left, they will eventually re-enter slavery, perhaps through another route. So we need to look at, for example, the Ministries of Information, Ministry of Women Affairs, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the Ministry of Youth and Social Development. These are all ministries that should be serving the people in various capacities. So how do they collect information? How do they connect with the citizen? Because it's not enough to write so many papers, not enough to present so many policies, if this does not reach the citizen that it should serve. Across board, we find out there is a disconnect between the citizens who should be the customers being served and the ministry, the public officials who work in the ministries. I'll give you an example. Let me use specifically Lagos State. Lagos State, where we were working to inform citizens about why they shouldn't get into fraudulent recruitment practices from traffickers. We show them how to identify a fraudulent opportunity. You know, it's usually someone close to you. It's usually a friend, a family member, a community member who shares this information. And because when you're speaking with a close family member, you're vulnerable. You don't have your guards up, which also means that you don't probe the opportunity to know that it is fraudulent. What we did not realize is that while a lot of people were exiting and going to other countries, Libya, Lebanon, and all that, for those dangerous opportunities, the Lagos State government had various economic advancement programs. So they had trainings for makeup, fashion designing, but this information was not, for some reason, communicated to the people that needed them the most. And so the only people who had access to these trainings or these opportunities were only those who were active members of a particular or the ruling political party. That's an error in government. I would then engage some of the center managers and ask, you know, how do you share this information? Because someone lives on this street and doesn't even know that this training goes on in this building, and this is a government building. And she says, well, I put up a banner outside. I said, it's not enough. You need to have, you know, community gatherings. You need to find the community leaders within that space. You need to get them to be the ones doing the recruitment for this program. And if we have more and more people doing that, since these are also the same people who share information, you might as well recruit them to do something positive. If they're able to get jobs and economic advantage opportunities for their wards, they won't need to send them abroad. They won't need to send them to those really dangerous journeys. It's another thing that can be done, or specific things that can be done. We need to, I say again, understand the issues. The issue of women and vulnerability. A lot of the women who embark on these journeys say they embark on it because they have no other option. There is pressure on them. They have 2, 3, 4, 5, sometimes 8 children, and these children need to go to school. Because they need to go to school, the woman is willing to sacrifice herself, go work as a maid in a foreign country, and send money home. Unfortunately, I'll give you figures. When she's leaving, say Nigeria, she's told she was going to be earning $1,000 or $2,000 per day, per month rather. And so on the promise of that, she leaves. Challenge is there is no migration information center where she can even verify this information about this country. True. Is there? Where is the local government where that can help her with the the exit process to be sure it's a real opportunity? No, so she gets on that plane, arrives in the country of the destination country, only to find out she has been sold, to find out she was advertised. We've had a lot of all those what I'll call websites where they are listed and prices are listed on them about the kind of jobs that they can do. But if there was a way to verify this before she left her country of origin, perhaps she wouldn't embark on that journey. So this is between the Ministry of Information, Ministry of Women Affairs, Ministry of Youth Development, and maybe the Ministry of Labor. How are they communicating? How are they engaging so that citizens are taken care of in a way that that is humane? So she gets only to arrive and see she's earning $150 a month, and she has to work 13, sometimes to 18 hours a day. Add to that, having to cope with sexual exploitation. Some of them are made into sex slaves. We had one we brought back who was a sex slave for sleeping with about 15 to 18 men per day. The reason she went on that journey was to get what was just work. So there is so much that can be done. I speak of communication. I speak of even the capacity and competence of those who work within this organization in public service. It's not enough to show up at work. It's also important to understand, to read the environment, to understand what are the needs, what specific needs, and to not sit only in your office and just read paper. No, I wouldn't say read papers, but issue documents out. Have focus groups where these policies or these ideas are tested to be sure, is it working? If it's not working, what can we do better? If we can connect the two and not work in silos and not be so focused on going on conferences and conventions, but not bringing back home all those things that are learned to be implemented back in the country. I think that's very important. Competence, and then the ability to lead. A lot of people are in public administrative space are okay with managing operations, but may not necessarily champion leadership. And so there is always that vacuum. What must we do now? In Nigeria, for example, we've had a lot of women and girls recently kidnapped. And then you ask yourself, what's the military doing? What is the police doing? Everybody's just giving excuses. And the excuses that are provided, you ask yourself, if this were your own child, would this excuse be tenable to you? I mean, how do you kidnap 300 girls and no one is talking about it? No one is making sure that, I mean, even the states, the government, someone needs to take responsibility for this. So I think that there seems to be a disconnect between the served and those who lead. And so we need to add empathy to our leadership. We need to add compassion. Compassion in a way that moves us to action. And then knowledge. Knowledge seems to be something that is missing. Sometimes I listen to speeches and you see that it seems the person who is leading, whether it's the ministry, the agency, or the department, is completely unaware of what the real issues are. So are there spaces where they can have, again, roundtables, village meetings, community meetings from time to time and take the feedback from those meetings to develop a people-centered agenda, a people-centered policy. If we're going to achieve the SDG, peace, justice, and strong institutions are required. And you cannot speak about justice if there is no sanction for those who violate or destroy the lives of other people. A lot of our citizens, especially our women and girls, I speak especially for women and girls, especially our women and girls are underutilized, are enslaved, are humanized, that's the word. And so they cannot perform optimally. We have one girl who just returned from Lebanon and she's not in her right state of mind anymore. We just brought her back. She's been sitting at the Nigerian airport. And so she cannot even tell what her experience is. They just traced her family. All of those things did not have to happen if there was a migration resource center where she could check for that information, if there was a Ministry of Women Affairs that could provide support prior to, if that, I just think that there's so much that needs to be done. So much needs to be done if we're going to make progress on this particular SDG. I think I would end here.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for your passionate, moving summary of what needs to be improved clearly when it comes to trafficking, when it comes to exploitation. In fact, it's not only girls and women, it can also be boys. But that in itself, as you probably know, right, this is part of SDG 16. There is a target, a specific target, which asks the question, what's happening in the country in regards to children being trafficked or not? So some of this information, just in a sense of a shadow report by civil society, could be made available to the government, or at least be publicly available to show there is something that needs to be amended and improved. And I think I can imagine that you have already accumulated a lot of evidence and a lot of information that if there is good cooperation with the government, this should be taken on board and be considered, which is not always the case. So thank you very much for giving us such a clear and concrete example of something that needs to be remedied, not only in Nigeria, in other countries as well. I'd like to use now the moment to also open up again the discussion and invite the two your predecessors, the other speakers, the two, to make comments. And I'm curious what you think could be imagined as solutions to the situation that we just now got so succinctly described and narrated by Omotola. Jean-Marie, you want to maybe take the floor? We don't hear you. You have to unmute yourself.
And now you can.
Yeah, now we hear you.
Okay, I think I would like to first thank Mrs. Omotola for this presentation because it's one of those that gets us out of our contextual, conceptual mind and puts and takes us into reality because this is real. Of course, we have been following stories from Nigeria, but besides those media stories, this is a problem that is very prominent in many countries, but I want to stick to Africa because that's probably where I have seen it with my own eyes. And this is a problem, as she has described, which cannot be easily addressed by traditional immigration setups. And I say she put emphasis on making sure that these officials are informed, but I think immigration structure arrangements as we know them, even when they're informed, I think can very easily, I don't think they can address this. Because first, it has got two ends, which are wrong, both of them. Two ends, you know. Where they go and where they come from, there is a problem on both sides. Now, let me say, where they come from, there is a problem I have already alluded to of equity related to poverty. Believe me or not, some of the, and it's not only girls, by the way. I come from Uganda, you probably know. I have seen also boys, men, going thinking they are going for good jobs and actually dying there, or being so mistreated that even when they come back, they don't get useful to themselves or to anybody. So it's talk about it with a gender perspective, but this is a general problem. And at the origin, it has to do with equity. It has to do with poverty. It has to do with the lack of opportunities in countries which you would even think are well-to-do. I mean, I'm from Uganda. It's a poor country. I get it. But Nigeria is not supposed to be like that. There are supposed to be opportunities in Nigeria, and there are opportunities, but maybe the network of programs that make it impossible for even educated people. You know, people who are educated, we're not talking about people who have never gone to school, who venture into these exploitative venues. And so I think addressing it would be extra administrative, if I can say. You need a government that is willing, first of all, that sees it as a problem of the people and engages the people on how to sort it out. But this cannot be only the government where these people originate from. It can only happen if the other government also sees it as a problem.
Yeah.
So sets on finding a way of addressing it. And then the international community can come in because, you know, I don't know, working with governments, we go there pretending we can solve problems. You know, we are from the United Nations, we are advisors, we can solve. It's not true. If I went to Nigeria to advise, what advice can I give? The Nigerian who has suffered the situation, who has witnessed it, is the one who knows it more than myself. So what advice can I give? But if I sit in a room with the government of Nigeria, central government, federal government, local community, NGOs, you know, and then we can generate knowledge about the magnitude of the problem and how to share it. I mean, how to find a solution. It's not something that can be solved by an administrative arrangement of government, the way I know governments now. You can see a very perplexing weakness in government, a strong government like the government of Nigeria, to have an armed opponent that comes and takes over 300 girls from a school and getting them becomes a problem. You know, under normal circumstances, if we were to speak strictly about public administration, that's not supposed to happen to a government that has mastered coercive power. Every government is supposed to have sufficient coercive power to prevent it from happening, or if it happens, to quickly remedy it. But then, despite this, we see it happening. That means there are some weaknesses in the governance thing, but it cannot be sorted out by government alone.
Yeah. Jean-Marie, thank you. Very well put. Any comments on the side of Louis about what to do to solve or to improve such a situation?
Very difficult. 2 points maybe. First is I fully agree with Jean-Marie that you need not only a whole of government approach, but also a whole of society approach to address these kind of issues, and also a whole of governments as a plural form, because governments from several sides of borders. And the second thing is, I think this is this whole problem is the governance of immigration issues is a so-called wicked problem. It's a very complex problem with so many angles. It's similar like corruption. It's also such a deeply embedded problem, which is so complex that and the typical thing of wicked problems is that you cannot really solve them. Each intervention changes the problem. It doesn't solve it. So what you can do is try to find angles or the parts of the problem that are solvable, and just work through incrementally, step by step, trying to work at smaller and bigger parts of the problem. But it's an illusion to think that there is a golden bullet. There is one solution for a complex issue like this.
Yeah, clear.
So it's also not just putting some money on the table. It's also not a solution.
Yeah, Lija, maybe you have some points of view on this.
Ramon, thanks for inviting me, and I want to thank Omotola for a very engaging, passionate, and also vivid presentation about one particular slice of issues that are confronting young people, and also specifically for young women and girls. And I want to echo what Jean-Marie mentioned, that we cannot solve the issue from far away and high above, but rather we need to really have come down to the ground, engage different stakeholders to use the word of Omotola's word is focus group. But in the lingo of the international community, it's called social dialogue. And I think I agree with Jean-Marie's very gung-ho attitude. We got to go out there and also engage in this social dialogue from the UN perspective, and that takes a lot of transformative leadership that you were talking about before. And I also agree with the comment made by Louis, saying that wicked problem requires breaking it down to smaller points. But as an organizational development specialist, we realize if we keep on working on incremental small progress, we eventually lost our direction and forgot why we were there. So how do we manage between these two extremes of the dynamics? And for me, and for CSAND, and also together with Raymond, we have been pushing for transparency. One is through a more system structured approach to look at the process. So we have a way to map the progression and what is actually happening. And the second is actually generating along the way data to allow for monitoring. Because we oftentimes, with this wicked problem, we don't even have a baseline. Where do we start? So I want to support what you call for information, Omotola. But it's not just about what can the way to do it, but it's actually what is happening in that particular ecosystem, where progress are made and where progresses are lagging, so we can start to see in that ecosystem where is the weak link in order to prevent. And we have done work in the area of fishery. That's another really a pit for slavery, and it's very complex, perhaps even more complex because it involves business model. So I think all we can do is to generate more data, more evidence, start to allow us to scale up the issue. It's not individual, it's not special, it's actually more pervasive than we are willing. Since we are all humans, so we sort of feel hurt to see this is, this medieval practice is still going on. So I think, we need to have ability to scale up, at least in terms of our understanding, and put our arms around it. So then we can start to look at where are the critical points. And perhaps I will go back to the global SDG report and look at, the entry points and the different levers that is proposed as a way to begin thinking about this in a more sort of a logical manner, because and it's more founded in the science. We need the science to help us to actually tackle this. So thank you very much for all of you for a great session, and I give it back to Raymond.
Yeah, thank you. We're about time to close. I just want to add my own final views on it. As Lija said, we've done research, we've published on human trafficking, and we found one problem being just a lack of data. Some governments on the sending or receiving side don't want to register what's happening. So there's no case to be made about who is to be asked to improve. But there's some things that can be done, and we found one very good example, and that is in Netherlands. Some banks have decided to cooperate. That is, they're when they see some financial transactions which look dubious, which look be linked to human traffickers, they are now sharing the information and then also share it with the government, so something can be done to at least stop the ease of doing business, so to speak, for those who are the human traffickers. So there are things that can be done even at the cross-border level, and I'm quite hopeful that more can be done for this. Just to close, in terms of our topic today being 16, what Omotola described and the specific case example, that's concretely 16.2, target 2 of SDG 16 and target 8 of SDG 16. So just to keep either reporting or shadow reporting on what's happening could help for countries to improve on this unfortunate, terrible condition that some of its citizens end up with through human trafficking, which of course is also linked to other conditions such as no job, poverty, and so on. Has been mentioned several times. I'm coming to the end, and I wanted to also give back the floor to Jean and to you, Lija. But before doing that, I wanted to express my thanks both to all three speakers. It was a very moving session, actually, to bring forward the concreteness where things need to be improved. And SDGs transformation is not just a lofty thing at the top of our heads. It can become very concrete when it's about some social problems or ills that need to be improved. But the first step for improving is to know what's happening, to get the data, and then ideally also to take the next step, which is to propose solutions or to make solutions become possible. Well, as I said, thank you very much to the three speakers. I would like to pass the word back to you, Jean.
Thank you very much, Raymond, and thank you, Richa. And I'd like to thank you, Raymond, as the moderator of this meeting today. There was a very good moderation that you ensured, and and then I would like to also thank all the speakers, Mr. Muhlmann, Louis Muhlmann, who's part of the Committee of Experts from Public Administration, the CEPA, founder, director of Public Strategy for Sustainable Development, and visiting professor at the Public Government Institute of the University of Leuven, Belgium, who also discussed the public administrative reform and success factors. And of course, I would like also to thank our colleague, Mr. John Mary Causi, Chief of Public Sector Innovation, Division for Public Institution and Digital Government at UNDESA. So is our colleague from UNDESA. We present on capacity building for public sector performance improvement, success stories, and examples. It was very interesting to hear, as much as it was interesting to hear Louis' presentation. It was very interesting also to hear John Mary's Koza's presentation and the examples that he brought. And of course, then with Miss Omotola from WUNI, she's wearing many hats. It's difficult to say exactly. I mean, she's doing many things, but also she resume that she's member of the Nigeria Economic Group Policy Commissions. But I think she does a lot more. And really, the examples that she gave us and the account she brought about her work was very touching and then very on real problems. But again, I mean, we was told that we also need to tackle this by other, also by all the directions. So anyway, the three presenters brought very different perspective, and it was very interesting to hear that. And it enriched our understanding about SDG 16. So once again, of course, we could have spent more time in the real world. I mean, without call you to Incheon City, and we would have discussed maybe a couple of more hours on this team, and we could have gone even for 1 or 2 days on the team alone. So, but I think that was a really good day. I mean, a good session for 2.5 hours that we had. despite the limitations of time. I'd like to thank again our guide, Ms. Licha Sanya Liu. I'd like to thank all the participants also for joining us. We have a lot of participants again today, and thank you for your comments and the questions. And I would like to invite you all to please join us again tomorrow at the same time, where we'll have the last session of this executive training course for policymakers for this year. And it will be on SDG 17 on partnerships. Once again, also, I want to thank the staff from UNOSD and then the interns, because they are responsible for this going very smoothly, and then we are very thankful to them. So I'd like to say thank you very much again, and goodbye, and see you tomorrow.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you very much. See you
Bye-bye.
tomorrow.
Thank you.
Good.
Thanks.